How's it going, guys? It's Eclipse here, and today we're going to be looking at how you can angle your tanks and increase your win rate in World of Tanks console when you use heavy tanks so that you can maximise your games, get more wins, be more efficient, survive longer, have more of an impact in the game, and generally just be a better player overall when you play your heavy tanks. And also some of your medium tanks might be able to take advantage of this, but it does rely on the tank specific armour. Now, to begin with what people determine as angling, you need to kind of understand the core mechanics, and that comes in the form of, imagine back in the day when you used to throw stones. If you throw it across the water, it's going to bounce so many times because when you throw it close to the water, it's going to ricochet off and it's not going to be able to cut through the water at certain points because it's just going that fast. It's similar to that with tanks and tank armour. You need a considerable amount of force to be able to come through the front of a tank at a stupid angle at like 80 degrees or something like that. You'd need a massive amount of energy to be able to go straight through, and that's reflected in World of Tanks by the effective armour of a tank. Now, what do I mean by effective armour? Well, effective armour takes the initial armour of the tank and then develops upon that by coming up with these models of how many millimeters of penetration will it take to go through a piece of armour that's 200 millimeters thick at an angle of 54 degrees like you see on screen. Well, you will need 348 millimeters of penetration in order to do that. Now, what does that mean? Well, basically it means if you angle your tank in specific ways, you can increase the value of its armour. So you'll see here on the frontal lower plate of the E100, for example, you can have 225 millimeters when you're looking straight at it. You know, that increases or decreases depending on if you're looking up at the E100 or down at the E100. You'll see that its armour gets more effective or less effective, respectively. Now, if we move on to the side armour of the tank, you'll see that you can increase the effective armour of the side if you angle at different angles. So this is really, really useful, and it's the key thing that angling is used for, basically, is coming out side scraping on corners and avoiding getting shot or taking a hit, and that's really key in order to have some successful battles. Now, how can we use this to our advantage? Well, say if we were on a building fighting in a brawl, how can we increase our armour or have a better chance of surviving a hit or something if we're on low health, you're facing an enemy E100? First of all, you need to turn your tank. You need to angle, because what happens when you angle is that it increases its effective armour. So you'll see here, if we're looking at the lower plate of the E100, it's now 260 to 250 millimeters of effective armour on its lower plate. The side armour is just never going to get penned, and the turret armour is 300 millimeters minimum. So the weakest point is still the lower plate, but it's a lot stronger than it was if you look here. So how can we do this even further? Well, if you angle even more, you can see that you've got 280 millimeters and your side armor is still really, really effective. It's key to be able to do this in a battle. You want to be giving them more of your side, but not too much to the point where, you know, you're giving them the flat side and they're going to be able to go through with 200 millimeters of penetration. So it's all about increasing the angles, but not over angling and enabling the enemy to go through the side of you. So you'll see here, this is the sort of angle you want to be at in the E100, looking at around 280 millimeters of penetration. And you know, this spaced armor also offers protection against heat rounds, so that's also key. So you'll see you want to be facing people like this, and this is how you're going to be able to survive more shots. So for an example of when you're zoomed out in World of Tanks console, then you know, this is what sort of angle you want to be at in your E100. Now, this doesn't work just for the E100, it will work for various different tanks, but is situational to a degree. Say if you're like this, what you want to do then is, say if my notepad is a building, you'll see that they can only get an effective armour of like 400 on the side of me. The weakest point then becomes my turret. if I'm angling like that. So you also want to angle your turret because that also works, but you don't want to angle it at the same angle as your track because it's just as weak. So you'll see that this is 300mm, and it's going to be a real struggle for most people to go through you unless they're firing premium. So that's also fantastic. And that's what's going to be able to survive against medium tanks. You can use this in TDs as well. And we'll look at another tank to be able to show you what sort of angling looks like in a different tank and with different armor profile. Now if we go to Russia, because a lot of people play the Russian tanks, and it's a good example of how armor can be used more effectively and also less effectively if you angle. So you'll see that we'll pick the Object 705 for example. Now frontally it's not the best tank. The turret is obviously the best part of the tank, but if we look at the lower plate, 240mm and 290 pretty much on the upper plate anywhere. If we angle, you see that the lower plate goes up to like 270 to 280, the side of the tank's up to 300 depending on where you hit. The inner drive wheel is probably the weakest point if it angles, so always shoot here if you're coming up against them. Don't go for the lower plate. You can use this quite effectively, but remember in this tank you don't want to over angle, so you don't need to angle as steeply as in the E100 because that just opens up this whole can of worms here and people are just going to go straight through you like it's butter. So you want to angle only slightly. So you'll see, you can increase your armor slightly than what it was before you angle at all. So angle slightly like this, not going to be able to pen you in the side, it's going to be very difficult. And if you side scrape like this, it's definitely the way to go. If you're side scraping against high penetration guns like the Jaegeru with heat rounds, you don't want to side scrape pretty much, because if they get the front of you, they'll pen just straight through the top of your tank. They could even pen the turret of you. So yeah, if you're going to side scrape a Jaegeru, you literally want to be able to give them like literally a sliver of your HP. Then you definitely want to literally angle like this, so you only show them this tiny section right here. If not, maybe this, but your turret becomes susceptible, and if you go even further they're going to be able to hit this flatter bit of your turret, and if you go further they'll hit this plate right here. If you can see that on screen, it's this bit here, and they'll be able to hit that. So don't angle when you come into those sort of situations. It's very similar for all of the tanks in the Russian tech tree. They're all very similar. Look at the armor profile before you go in your tank. Decide upon if it's angled in a certain way. One good example I know is actually the French heavy, the AMX M454. This is a tank where angling is actually worse. So say if you're front on, then you've got about 340mm of effective armor on the upper plate and these little side bits, and then you've got 260 on the lower plate. If you angle, what happens is, your front plate goes up to 370mm and you're not going to be able to get pen there very reliably, and your lower plate goes up to nearly 300mm of penetration. But what happens is this angled bit that was angled and 350mm then goes down to 200, and people are going to be able to pen you very, very, very reliably through this, as well as pen you through the track. So it's very debatable whether you want to side scrape in such a tank. You also need to know that people can overmatch. Now, an overmatch is where the caliber of their gun is bigger than the side of is 3 times more than your actual initial armor. So say if I was in a 120mm gun, now that means that I could pen any armor that is under 40mm of actual armor. So you see that there's the effective angle, you've got the effective armor, it's actually the impacted armor that is what you need to look at. So on your tanks in the game, if you want to check out if you can side scrape or not, or if you can side scrape safely, what you need to do is you go onto the tank viewer, in-game armor viewer. You want to check what the side armor is like. So say this tank right here, you're pretty safe to side scrape against most things, so long as you're side scraping well. You're going to have 60mm on the side, which means that only tanks with 181 millimeters of penetration will be able to overmatch you and go through regardless of the angle. Now that happens for every single kind of tank in the game, so say if I had 120 millimeters and someone had a 39 millimeter side armor and they tried to angle against me, I could just go straight through, no matter whether there was, no matter if it was like almost a 90 degree angle, 89 point blah blah blah, it would still go through. Even if it was this minute angle like this and I hit it right there, it would still go through regardless of what the effective armor is. If I have if the caliber of my gun is 3 times that of the impact armor itself, not the effective armor. So that's always something to really note down. And you'll find that in things like the Death Star and the FV4005, you can overmatch the top of a lot of tanks' turrets. So although a tank might be like, yeah, I'm ready to brawl, whatever, because you're quite tall, you can actually hit the top of their tank and you can overmatch it, which means you don't even have to aim at weak spots. You just literally hit the top of their turret, so long as they have armor that is weaker than your caliber 3 times. So yeah, that is what angling is kind of about, what you can use angling for, and using it to effectively increase your armor somewhat. And in a tank like this, you can still angle, but what you need to be aware of is actually you need to wiggle. So what wiggling does is it puts the opponent under pressure to shoot you because they're going to be aiming for your weak spot. So say if I was front on, they're going to be aiming at my lower plate. If then right before they fire I angle like this, it's going to increase the angle of my lower plate, which means that they're going to bounce. But this gets weaker, so they might switch to this, and then when I go back, it's going to be even weaker, and they're not going to be able to pen, so they're going to have to aim back there, and it's going to waste their time, and it might allow you to get another shot in, or they might derp a shot into your upper plate here at a silly angle when they're aiming for this bit as you move back, and it's going to increase the chance of you bouncing a shot than if you were to just sit straight on, not moving at all. So in a tank like this, where you've got weak points here, you want to be moving side to side rather than just angling like this and just sitting there. So that's one key thing. It works in pretty much every single tank in the game, so any way in which you can angle is always a good chance in your heavy tank, and it's always going to be the best bet. Now, if you want to ask me any question as to which tanks are good, then you can do that in the comment section down below. Just ask me whatever tank you're playing in and whether it will be good to side scrape, what sort of things that I should be doing in that tank, or etc, etc. Also, answer each other's questions if you see them down there, and I haven't got round to it yet. Feel free to do that. Anyway, guys, if you want to check out more guides on the channel, which there should be coming very soon alongside the previous ones on World of Tanks console, then you can do that after this video ends, or right now there should be two videos on screen. There should be a guide and whatever my most recent video is that I've done on World of Tanks console. Hopefully you did enjoy. Hopefully you found it actually useful, and you'll be able to implement it in your game to have better games, improve that win rate, and also gain a better understanding of when you can take out tanks, when you shouldn't fire, when you should fire, when you should change the weak spot that you're aiming at to something else. And yeah, hopefully that really does help in it, and it brings a bit more knowledge to the community overall. Other than that, I hope you guys have a good rest of your day whenever it is that you watch this video, and I hope to see you in the next video. Goodbye.